Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at mobile app development. I'm Tim Bornholt. Let's get nerdy. Today we're speaking with Trinity Wiles. Trinity is the global coordinator at WatchPitch, which is an app that lets you share your 60-second pitch with investors to receive some feedback and hopefully some funding for your next project. Trinity is also a 20-year-old college student and has already been in the entrepreneurial space for years. Her most recent business was called Tipster, and that basically set out to eliminate the manual entering of credit card tip receipts. So servers could use image capturing technology to eliminate errors and cut down on fraud and all of that good stuff. In this episode, you will learn a lot of things, actually. You'll learn why it's important to leverage your network and use your existing resources to get started with an app, the importance of learning how to speak geek so you can effectively communicate with your tech team, advantages you can use as a college student to get a business started, and what you should have in hand before you even think about approaching an investor. Trinity was fantastically insightful, and whether you're a college student looking to get a business started of your own, or if you're a non-technical person looking to build a new piece of software, I guarantee listening to this episode, you will walk away with several tips that'll push you in the right direction and get a successful software company off the ground. So without further ado, here is my interview with Trinity Wiles. Trinity Wiles, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Tim.
It's an honor to have you on. Like I was telling you before the show started, I found you on LinkedIn. We've been kind of going back and forth on that platform, and I thought you have a really interesting background at such a young age, and I thought maybe you'd have a few things that we can ask and learn from you as we go through your background and just kind of have a nice conversation from there.
Yeah, awesome. Sounds good.
Sweet. So why don't you tell me and the audience about yourself? You know, talk about Tipster and living abroad and WatchPitch and all the good stuff that you've been working on here.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So I have 1 year left of undergrad at Western Carolina University. My freshman year in an entrepreneurship class, what started it as an idea turned into actually launching a business. So essentially, it was a product that automated the credit card tip reporting process in nightclubs, bars, restaurants, casinos, those types of venues. So I've had a lot of experience, especially as a non-technical person myself. I'm more of a creative-minded, marketing, if you want to say, kind of person with this idea and vision for where we wanted to take the company. And so I have some experience with bringing on technical people, bringing on a technical team, making sure you have the right team and you're getting done what you need to. So after that, I did that for 3 years. Just recently, I want to say, retired it. As the industry was changing, there's a lot of new products coming out that it just wasn't going to be that much space for us anymore, especially us having to integrate with big, large companies into their computer systems was just super costly. So our margins were getting smaller. And it was kind of, you got to look at it holistically, like, is this going to be successful? And I don't know. So moving on from that, I went abroad and I was studying and I reached out to this startup and asked, hey, what can I do for you? I'm going abroad. So I represented them abroad, going to conferences, creating relationships in the startup community for potential partnerships. And I now work with them, and it's WatchPitch. It's an app that connects entrepreneurs to investors. So that's kind of how I got that experience. I lived in Madrid, Spain, London, England, and Rome, Italy. So I kind of got a taste of everything for 5 months, and it was an awesome experience.
That's awesome. And like you said, you've got a wide range of things we can talk about here. So I thought we could jump into Tipster. I did want to say beforehand too, I like that you said that you're more marketing minded, creative minded rather than technical, because I'm the complete opposite way. All of my apps and everything I've ever done is the most literally named thing you could possibly think of. And it's very, very rigid and analytically minded, as opposed to more the creative side. So I think, as I'm sure you've learned, it takes all types to make a business successful. So.
Oh, totally. You got to have that balance.
So you mentioned that you had some success recruiting technical people into your company. And I think that a lot of people that listen to this show have that issue of, I have this really great idea, but I have no idea where to go to find a technical team. And I would love to be able to say, everybody in the world come to the Jed Mahonis Group and we'll help you out. But I mean, it's not that straightforward. So what was your process like for finding technical people to get your idea off the ground and into people's hands?
Yeah. So looking at the type of industry or the type of product we wanted to create, it's going to be different for everyone. So for people creating an app, it's going to be different. They might try to get technical people overseas. I really looked into everything. I looked into Fiverr, all those kind of freelance contracted worker sites where you can find technical people. But really what I settled on was like, okay, I'm really going to leverage my relationships and leverage my resources that I have here at the university, because we're kind of bootstrapping this thing. So all we needed was, okay, we got to get some sort of prototype running. So reaching out to, they're actually alumni, some engineering students to do like the product design and the functionality part, and then reaching out to students like I knew, or students I found on campus that were computer science information majors, or so really leveraging the resources that you have. Like for me, being in college, it was nice to be able to do that. I think if I were out of college, I'd be doing it differently, and if I had a little more money and resources, but definitely that worked for us getting a prototype, and that's really all we needed at that point. So yeah, that's kind of how I went about finding them.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And that's whenever I get approached by people that are in college and they're like, I have no idea where to start for finding like people to help me code my app and stuff. And it's like, especially at the University of Minnesota here, I'm just like, just walk 3 buildings over and talk to a couple of nerds. Like you're right there in the thick of things with people that are just like you, that want to get something done. And in college, I mean, it might not seem like you have all the free time in the world, but I mean, I remember I had way more free time then than I do now. And it's like, you could find somebody and say, hey, can you take a couple hours and whip up this prototype for me and take a chunk of the company, or however you figure out compensation and stuff. It's like, yeah, leveraging networks is absolutely huge. Yeah.
So also an option is like, get your professors to rally for you. So make it a project for school even. So it doesn't even have to take up that much time and you're still benefiting from it. So talk to your professors. Usually professors are super willing to help. Especially in the business department at my school, like, okay, we'll help you. We'll connect you with some people in other departments. So just leveraging your professors, being like, hey, can this be a project? Like, can we collaborate with them? So that's a big thing that I think a lot of people overlook, especially being in college. I'm like, we have all these resources, like, take advantage of that,
I'm sure that you're accruing enough debt for student loans that you might as well take advantage of those.
Worth, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You're already spending all that money. You might as well go and talk to, that's what I found too, is professors are really willing to help you out and sit down and hear your ideas, because not a lot of people take you up on that.
Right. Exactly.
So what lessons, besides like the technical side of things, like what lessons did you take away from Tipster that you were able to apply to your ongoing ventures here, like with WatchPitch or just going forward in general?
Yeah. So like I kind of already mentioned, like leveraging networks and trying to meet as many people as you can. You never know when there's some space to collaborate or some way that they can help you or you can help them with anything down their career path. Like there's people that I've met just from going to conferences. Like for Tipster, initially I went to a lot of startup conferences, just trying to get a feel, especially when I was starting out, because I was super new to the entrepreneurial world and like the buzzword like startups. I'm like, what even is this? But just like kind of immersing yourself in that and making as many connections as you can, because there's some people I met then that I still have stayed in touch with. I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever work together, but now we're like, okay, we're doing stuff, we're collaborating, we're working together. So you never know like where those relationships will take you, but I think it's a super powerful thing. So
Absolutely.
That's my advice.
So it's really all about relationships and taking what you had learned before and moving it into the next venture, and seeing how you can benefit from how you can benefit others just as much as how they can benefit you.
Right. Exactly.
Right on. And I got to ask too, even if it might be a slightly painful subject, but winding down a business, I think that's something that not a lot of people consider when they're starting a business. Is like, once you've started this thing, you either need to see it all the way through, especially if you have customers paying you, or if you have things going on. Winding it down is really important. So talk a little bit about that and what your experience was like winding down Tipster.
Yeah. So obviously it's never easy, because it's like they say, it's your baby. Like that's what you've been working on so hard, but invested so much time in, even some money. But I honestly kind of looked at it like, okay, this is a really good learning experience. There's so many things I took away from that I would never know now. I'm like, the mistakes that I made, I'm so glad I made it then, and I'm not going to make them in the future. So kind of looking at everything is like, okay, yeah, maybe I failed, but it's not necessarily a failure. Okay, what came out of it? A lot of awesome relationships, a lot of awesome connections, a lot of awesome knowledge, and being able to speak to that and learn from it, kind of to give some input on, trying to start a tech business and nothing about tech. Just some advice I would give people that kind of sticks out in my mind that I would even do for the future. Like, the basis of your product. So like we had this creative vision and I knew how it worked, but like learn the terminology so you're able to communicate that terminology to your development teams. Like, so maybe I don't know how like OCR works or anything like that, but that's not my job. My job is to be able to communicate like all the technical terms to them of what I want done. And that's how you're going to get stuff done. Because they might be able to understand you, but like learning the basics, I guess. So learn the basics and the basic functionalities and the things you at the bare minimum need to know, like technically speaking, to be able to communicate what you want done. Because there can be a lot of confusion in there. And they're there to, like, your team is there to help you learn. So, yeah, that's my advice.
That makes a whole lot of sense, because I think a lot of times people look at technology and they say, like, well, I don't know how that works, and I'm not even going to take the time to learn how it works. And so you kind of you have an idea of what you want to get done, but you kind of handicap yourself by saying, I'm just never going to know how this tech stuff works. So just put it aside. Where like what you're saying is, if you actually take, some time and you research high level things like OCR. Yeah. Most people don't know what optical character recognition is, but if you take a second to go on Wikipedia or watch a YouTube video and you're like, oh, okay, that's what that means. And now, like if you come to a developer, you're not going to say like, what's the thing that does the text to like image to text thing? You can actually say like OCR, and it's probably the same kind of thing. Like if you go into a mechanic and you're like, my car doesn't work and there's a squeak, where if you can be like, yeah, it sounds like it's coming from this part of the car, like that, obviously I know nothing about cars, so that's a horrible thing.
That's me, the technicians.
But yeah, like I can see what you're saying. It's really important. Like at the end of the day, everything is communication, and being able to effectively communicate is how you're going to have a successful company and a successful software product.
That was a good summary. Like, I'm not going to sit down and learn code, because that's a waste of my time if someone else can do that. But I'm going to know the names of the programs we need to use, or like what I want it to do. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
Just the bare technical minimum.
And that's all it takes. It's not like you need to, you don't need to sit down with a giant book and learn how to code. It's just knowing the basics. So that makes a whole lot of sense. So moving on out of Tipster and now into living abroad, I think you mentioned that you had kind of spent a little bit of time with the startup cultures in the different parts of the world. Talk about your experience with that and what it was like being immersed in cultures that are startup minded but not necessarily U.S. centric.
So I remember showing up at it was a startup grind event in Spain. And I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't get a hold of anyone before the program. So I was just like hoping this was going to be in English because my Spanish, like I know bare minimum Spanish, just enough to get by and like have simple conversations, like nothing much more than that. I'm like, I don't know how effective I'm going to be, but ended up being in English, which was awesome. Kind of the way I went about that is before I even went abroad, I reached out to certain individuals asking for recommendations on like what events I should go to. Like, hey, I just want to meet for coffee, like help me kind of figure out what the scene is like here and like where I need to be. And what I found is like once you go and immerse yourself, you meet more people who will refer you to other people, and you really make some strong connections, and you'll end up at some cool events too. So like people start inviting you to other events, because sometimes, I mean, you don't know if it's going to be a good or very like effective networking place until you get there. So going into it, I kind of went in like, with, okay, I just want to meet people and I just want to learn, like, that's what I'm going to do here.
Yeah.
Just kind of in with an open mind, because it is different. And just kind of like respecting the way things are done.
That makes sense. And like you said, being able to go with a little preparation ahead of time and to know where things are at and who you can make some connections before you even get there. I mean, we all have the internet. You can find people on LinkedIn. Right. So I think, I think that's good advice right there, is just do your homework before you go and take a little initiative. That makes a whole lot of sense. What did you take away from like being abroad and being in those types of startup areas that you wish was different here in the US? Like what do you think we can take away from over there that we can apply here and make our startup culture a little bit better?
So I got the sense, especially in Spain, like it's very relationship based, and things here are relationship based, but like they take their time with things. They take their time with relationships. Here, I feel like a lot of times we're rushing things. We're very like instant gratification, but like their culture in general is just like a little bit like more, okay, like let's see this relationship through. Let's grow this relationship. And then it's like a business relationship. You know what I mean? Do you kind of understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, London's pretty similar to here, if I would say so. Yeah, that's kind of a big takeaway. Is just like go and just try to understand the cultural differences and like just go in with an open mind.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And I like your point about with building relationships and taking time to grow. You're right. That does seem to be how business moves in the US, of just, okay, like go to I'm sure you've been to 100 networking events in the US where it's just everyone has their card and it's speed dating and everyone's just like trying to get their card in your face, and you're not actually forging a relationship, where it's like all the success that I've ever seen in my life has come from I talked to somebody at some networking event 6 years ago, and then we had a meaningful conversation, and then you reach out again, like 4 years ago, and you get coffee, and then it's just like after 6 years, then all of a sudden the need arises and you can kind of grow it from there. It doesn't have to be something where it's like, okay, how can you benefit me right this second? It's planting seeds and fostering relationships and all that kind of stuff that leads to successful companies.
Exactly.
Right on. This one, I had one question about software in general. Maybe you have an answer to this or maybe not, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are about most people that are listening to this, I would assume are in the US or London, or, kind of in that American based market. And I think that we kind of think about ourselves a little too highly compared to the other 6 billion people there are in the world.
Yeah.
So what advice would you, or what do you think would be some good tips that people could take away for better serving international audiences as opposed to focusing just on US based audiences?
Just making sure you have like a deep cultural understanding. And I don't even know, I feel like I even just kind of brushed the surface, but these are not my words. This is from my friend in Spain. We were chatting and he said, people just aren't as receptive to technology here. Like, especially like social media, like, apps aren't as big, like necessarily, like they don't have Snapchat, kind of some of the social networks that are super popular here. So like having a deep understanding of like, I would say like consumer behaviors within a culture, because it's going to be different. You can't just market something here and expect it to do the same and do as well somewhere else. You have to understand how they work. And it's kind of how like McDonald's, like, yeah, the golden arches are everywhere, but like they have different food in different locations across the world.
Yeah.
It's kind of that concept, like thinking about that when you're creating an app or creating whatever you're creating.
That makes perfect sense. I was in Vegas before I turned 21, and so there's not much else you can really do except go to like the Grand Canyon, or sorry, not the Grand Canyon, the Hoover Dam, or you can there was Coca-Cola has like a shop on the Strip, and so I went into there, and you can have a sample of Coca-Cola. It's basically like a flight of like 12 different types of Coca-Cola from around the world. And yeah, it's like there's Coke that's green in some countries. There's Coke, and it's like the straight up like Coca-Cola recipe. There's some that are extra sweet. There's some that are really bitter. There's some that are like, I think to your point, it's like Coke really understands that what works for American consumers is not necessarily going to work for like Indonesian consumers, for example. So yeah, I think taking the time to understand your audience is crucial. Moving on to WatchPitch here. So how did you get connected over with the team at WatchPitch? Yeah,
so I met Trey, who's the founder of WatchPitch, at a conference I was actually at for Tipster. So after I decided to kind of, I say the word retire Tipster, move on, focus my energy on something else, kind of gain some more experience, I reached out to him and I said, hey, like, what can I do for you guys? Like I said, I'm going abroad. I really want to get I want to get something extra out of my experience. Like being abroad and studying abroad and living abroad is an amazing experience in itself, but I kind of want to do something. I want to understand like the business culture at like a minimum in all these different places. And he was all for it. So I went over there, went to a lot of events, got to speak at the London Business Show event about WatchPitch, made a lot of awesome connections, and some potential partnerships in the works. So that was a great opportunity for me. And now I'm back and I'm still on the WatchPitch team. So that's where I'm kind of at right now.
Awesome. I think I was looking into WatchPitch after obviously reaching out to you, and I think you probably, as part of your job, I'm sure now, like you said, you're learning how business works and trying to understand that world a little bit. And I'm the same way. It seems like you can watch Shark Tank and glean a little bit from that, but really, that's TV. That's not how pitches should actually work.
Right.
So what have you learned so far working there and seeing, because do you get to actually see a lot of pitches in your role there?
I do, yeah. So I actually get to help some people do their elevator pitch. So the way it works is entrepreneurs, business owners, people with ideas, even like if you're in idea phase, you can post a 60-second elevator pitch on the app, and we have investors that are users on the app. Essentially, it's a way for entrepreneurs to get access to like a more convenient deal flow system. So a lot of ways to get funding is through like you got to do a lot of applications if you're trying to apply for a group, a VC group, angel group. It's a big, like really long process, but this is kind of like an instant way to do it. It's kind of like, I guess, a Shark Tank online.
What have you, so I'm sure you've seen, if not hundreds, thousands of pitches now at this point. What would you see, like what makes an effective pitch?
Act like you're having a conversation with a person instead of talking at them. That's a big thing I see a lot is people try to do these scripted pitches, like have your ideas scripted in your head, but like let the words flow as natural as you can. And don't be afraid to let your passion show. I mean, that speaks a lot when you can tell that someone's passionate about someone. And if it's super scripted, then you might sound like a robot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen a lot of pitches too where, like, do you ever listen to like the startup podcast or anything like that? I mean, I'm sure you've just, as you've seen, you see pitches where people have rehearsed it so many times and it's like the words that they're saying don't, like, they sound like they're scripted words and not something that you would actually say when you're talking to somebody. And those are the people where I see it and I'm like, do you even know what you're saying at this point? Or are you just regurgitating the stuff you've memorized? It doesn't make sense.
And I understand like the intimidation of like not having something memorized, because I used to be like that. I remember in high school doing business competitions, I was kind of like that scripted pitcher. And like, it's funny looking back because I thought I was good. I'm like, oh my gosh. But you kind of figure it out. It all comes with experience, and each time it comes more natural to you. So that's my main advice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice. What one last thing with WatchPitch. So if and I think this also goes into, I mean, you've obviously, like you said, you've been doing this since high school. You've got a lot of experience with going out talking to investors, with actually successfully raising money to do ventures. I think a lot of people who listen to this show, again, being in kind of the startup phase and trying to figure out how to get an app built, they always say like, oh, well, I mean, I'll just go out and raise money. Like, it's just something you can walk down the street and people are going to throw you tens of thousands of dollars. You know, that's an easy thing. And I think that's obviously not the case. So right. If I was in the position, and if you're talking to somebody who's in the position of going out and raising money, so I mean, obviously, in addition to using WatchPitch and getting feedback on your pitch, what steps would you recommend taking? How does somebody get started in going to find money to build their app?
Okay, yeah. So it really depends from company to company. It's going to be a case-by-case basis. I first started with raising grant money. Like, if you're in a college, most likely your business school or honors college might have grants available. So like applying for a grant, trying to get grants, doing competitions where you can get that money to just bootstrap a prototype. Then I would suggest kind of like when it's time to get more serious about funding, definitely do your due diligence. Make sure you're applying to the right places, because it does take a lot of time to raise money and go through that whole process. So don't just kind of like take it as like, oh, I'll just apply as many places as I can. Like, make it very specific and like very strategic for you, and kind of like make sure you know what kind of investor you're looking for. So what kind of like portfolio they have, stuff like that.
So with that, like what places, I mean, a lot of people think I can just go down to the bank and get a loan, or I could go to get an angel. Like how would you start? Like if you were at square one and you needed to raise, you're building, again, like some social networking app or something, and you needed to raise $50,000 for development. How would you step? Like how would you go step by step to be able? And I know you can't really go step by step, but what would your first steps be for finding somebody that would give you the money for that?
I would say even like a good place to find these people is like different kind of like pitch competitions. Like, there's always investors there looking for ideas, and making sure you're getting in and talking to the right people. Even like ask people in your network for referrals. Like, do you know any investors? It's kind of like I said, it's very like a building a relationship type of thing. So that would be like the quickest way to do it, is like through relationships and trying to find them that way. But if you don't have that network, I would say like do your research. Like, for some companies, depending on what industry you're in, there's a lot of grants available online. There's a lot of different things that can kind of give you a little bit of money to start. And then, that's my advice for that.
That's really good advice, because I think people, first of all, underestimate how expensive software is to build. And second, I think people also underestimate how many people are willing to shell out money just for an idea. And I think to your point of doing homework, I mean, you probably would recommend actually having a deck together and your ideas more squared away. Like what do you think people should have together before they actually go out and try to pitch an investor?
Okay, so have voice of customer. Like, we interviewed over 100 different businesses in our market before we actually even created anything. So doing your market research, staying up to date on all the industry changes is super important. You never know, if you're working on an idea, the likelihood of someone else working on the same thing is surprisingly pretty likely.
Yeah.
So doing that research, really getting that voice of customer, going out, interviewing the customers, the people you are trying to target with your product, and asking them for their feedback. What features would you like to see? We did a little bit face to face. We did a lot over the phone, even a few through emails. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. But make sure you have a defined target, and make sure you have something to show. It doesn't necessarily yes, investors like to see traction and numbers, but if you're still kind of in the idea phase, then make sure you have a solid amount of feedback from customers, stuff like that. Just show that you've done some sort of research.
So don't go to an investor and say, I've got this idea, now give me $100,000.
Right. Right.
Go to them and say, I've talked to 15 people that have already put down $1,000 a month for me to do this thing. And I've talked to such and such. Okay. That makes perfect sense to me. Mm-hmm. What, that's about all the questions I've got written down. I'm curious, do you have any other thoughts that you would want to share? I think, again, with you being as young as you are, still in college, and I'm sure a lot of people, I hear from college students all the time of I have an app idea and I want to get this thing started. You've already shared a lot of really great advice for people in your position. Is there anything else you can think of, if you had to talk to somebody that was in college and they're trying to figure out how to get an app built and off the ground, is there anything else that you would share with them to help them get along to that point of actually building it? Yeah.
So consult with a professor that you trust, especially they can help you and guide you to some resources. College is great because, one, we can pull the student card when interviewing people, hey, I'm a student, and a lot of people are really willing to help students.
Oh yeah.
You can just say it's for a project. Don't have to go into details with it if you're trying to keep your idea secure, stuff like that. You don't have to disclose anything. Just, hey, I'm a student doing a project for research. People love that. Pulling the student card, definitely, like I've said 5 times, I think, leverage your resources. So we have a lot of awesome databases you can access through your library. So pretty much all the colleges, I'm sure, have all these resources to be able to help you start your research. So find someone who can kind of mentor you. I suggest a professor, leverage your resources, leverage your contacts, and get someone to help guide you, and even do some cross collaboration with other departments in the school and other schools. So that's my advice for any college students who are trying to, it seems simple. There's a lot that goes into it, but just while you're a student and while you still can, use these resources, because we're going to miss them after school. I'm what am I going to do when I don't have access to all this stuff? But, right. So that's my advice.
Well, you got to do what I do is you find an intern that has access to all those resources.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If I started my business the year after college for me, and I think I wish I would have started it in college, because you're right. You can learn so much from so many people, and you can pull that college card. You could easily, if you're trying to start, speaking firsthand experience, if I was starting a software consultancy again, if you're in college, you can call all of the competition in the area and say, hey, I'm doing I'm doing a research report, and I need to know, how many customers do you get? What's the average sale? What's this and that? And if you're a 20-year-old college student and you go in kind of, play the college role up, like go in very wide eyed and you have no idea what you're like talking about, and just ask questions, and people will, and plus on top of that, if you're doing that while you're in college, if your business fails, I mean, like in your position too, if you end up like everything implodes, you've made how many contacts with how many people that you can go back to and say, hey, remember we talked before, like I need a job now, or like whatever.
Exactly. Like, seriously.
It's really like the being in college. Like I think a lot of people might see that as a handicap of, well, how is anyone going to trust a college student? You can get that as well. But I think at any point in your career, whether you're a 20-year-old college student or a 50-year-old, mom who's just all their kids are in high school and you're looking to start a new thing, it's like there's definitely disadvantages at any point in your life, but there's a lot of advantages you can use to be able to play up all your strengths and use that to your advantage. Right.
You really hit the nail on the head there.
Awesome. Well, you did as well. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today, Trinity. Do you have any last thoughts or anything you want to plug on to leave our audience with here?
Yeah. So I always say, like, don't be afraid to fail. And if you do, don't think of it as a failure. Think of it as a learning experience. Now, that being said, don't go and irrationally dump a lot of money into something, but do your research, use your resources, and figure it out as you go. Like, you're never going to know everything. So surround yourself with people who know more than you. That would be my advice.
Well, that's very sage advice. And then you can tell, like we've said 100 times now, you're 20, but you've definitely got a bright future ahead of you. So keep up the great work on your end. And thank you for sharing what you've learned so far with the audience today. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Our guest today was Trinity Wiles. You can find her on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Trinity Wiles. Show notes for this episode can be found at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with us by emailing hello@constantvariables.co. I'm at Tim Bornholt on Twitter, and the show is at CV_podcast. Today's episode was edited by the knavish Jordan Doust. This episode was brought to you by the Jed Mahonis Group, who builds mobile software solutions for the on-demand economy. Learn more at jmg.mn.